Hello, this is Jonathan with Hartford Baptist Church, and welcome to we're episode 18 now of our study through Galatians. We are in chapter 5 still. We're just gonna do 3 verses today. Remember, Paul just got done yelling at, well, not yelling at, but his little sarcastic remark. I wish that those who unsettle you would emasculate themselves, make themselves into eunuchs. Paul's most, well, he was aggressive. Um, but he's calming down now at this point, and he's going to warn warn the believers of the church here. And the chapter 5 is too big for us to knock it out in this episode, so we're just going to do the 3 verses here. But starting verse 13, for you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. Starting in verse 13, says, you were called to freedom, brothers, or the NET says, the net says brothers and sisters, which is perfectly fine. The Greek adelphoi there, based on the context and the word itself, it absolutely most likely means brothers and sisters. He's just not talking to men here. But says you were called to freedom. Remember, he's talking about you're not under the law. Of course, and that's in the context of you're not under the law for salvation, and you're not under the law as your guardian. And he's going to get to who you're under at this point, which we've hinted at. It's Christ. You're under Christ. Christ is what's redeemed you. But we'll develop that idea later on, especially chapter 6. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh. That is, the flesh is your sinful nature. It's like, yeah, you're not under the law, but don't let the fact that you don't have to observe the Sabbath cause you to sin. Yeah, you're saved by faith alone, but don't let that be an excuse that you can commit fornication or adultery or theft. And actually, he gives kind of skipping ahead here, but Paul gives a whole list of things you're not allowed to do despite being saved by faith. Sexual morality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery. Yep, you can't be Harry Potter. Enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalry, so on, so on. But these are things you do not want to do. Yes, you are saved and forgiven of your sins, but does not mean it's okay to sin. Don't let your freedom make you think it's okay to sin. But then he goes on to say, still in verse 13, it's a long verse, but through love serve one another. Both the ESV and the NET and pretty much all translations went with serve. But douloete, which is, there's 9 letters in this Greek word, and it's 6 are vowels. Yeah, thanks, Paul. Tries to give me a tongue twister. But we're going to look this word up. This serve is a pretty mild way to say this. It's a verb. It means to be owned by another, be a slave, be subjected, to act or conduct oneself as in a total service to another, perform the duties of a slave, serve, obey. We're supposed to do this to each other in the church. We are to be each other's slaves, to conduct ourselves in the total service of another. Selfless acts. Many of you, especially if you've been to Chrysalis or Emmaus, you've heard the term agape. You've probably heard me or Brother Jason say it in sermons as well. It is that selfless love, that selfless acts. You are called to do that to each other inside the church. And of course, if everybody's serving everybody, that is true freedom. Nobody's truly a slave there. Oh, that window will not go down. Okay, it's gone now. It's bugging me. All right. Moving on to verse 14. For the whole law is... Okay, we already read that one. Where are we at? Yeah. No, let's do it. Yeah, we haven't done that. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus gives us something similar as well. He talked about love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. But what Paul's talking about here, Paul's now saying, he seems to be saying that we should fulfill the law. Paul just said we're not under the law. That the law doesn't count. But Paul does not say you shouldn't live by the law. He's not saying that there's certain moral aspects that you shouldn't be doing. In fact, Paul's going to finish chapter 5 saying that Christians are still morally accountable and have a moral code, a moral law that they're still required to obey. Chapter 6 is going to call it the law of Christ. You're still called to live a certain way. Don't let your freedom, don't let the fact that you're forgiven of your sin be an excuse to sin. And of course, if you love your neighbor as yourself, the idea behind that is that's a good guide in faith. How you treat someone. If you're treating them like you treat yourself, odds are you're not going to sin against them or God. Verse 15, but if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. This is really tying into the next section. He's talking about, and we all know believers can still backstab and bite one another and attack one another. And the word for bite here, we've got dakano. It's actually used of a snake bite. Now that gloss says bite, but it's almost always used to discuss the bite from a snake. Of course, a lot of snakes are poisonous. This is a deadly bite. Um, and believers can certainly do that. We start, especially in the context of using our freedom as an excuse to sin. We're no longer accountable to anything. We think we can do what we want because we believe ourselves to be free from accountability, free from the law, which is, in a sense, is true. We are free from the law in regards to salvation, but God still wants us to live a certain way. And I'm really tempted to go on to verse 16 and on, but we'll pause there. Verse 15, that bite and devour, it's going to make much more sense when we consider the works of the flesh that Paul's going to talk about in verse 19. Things that have no place in the church, but yet are way too often inside the church. And we will stop there. Just kind of something to think about. How can you who and how can you serve someone in the church? What can you do for them to serve? To be that servant, to show them agape love, to give them unconditional service. Yeah, the idea is you get that service back, but that's on them. You can't control them. But just obeying scriptural command, how can you show love through service in the church this week? And I'll see you next time.